Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. My name is Laura Whalen. I'm the Executive Director of your Alumni Association, and I'm thrilled to have you all here this evening at the National Press Club for A Night with Northwestern in DC, the fight for Capitol Hill. This panel discussion was made possible through a very collaborative university-wide effort with the Alumni Association, Medill, the Club of DC, the Medill Club of DC, the Northwestern University Black Alumni Association, and the Kellogg Alumni Club of DC, Maryland, and Virginia. The NAA is committed to connecting you with each other and your alma mater at every stage of your life. This panel discussion is just one of the many examples of a lifelong journey opportunities that we provide for you. You can find out more by visiting the Alumni Association at alumni.northwestern.edu and connecting with Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Our Northwestern, the university's online community. For those of you that tweet, you can add your own voice into tonight's discussion by using the hashtag ANightWithNU. The panel we've assembled tonight is a terrific example of the kind of accomplished men and women that make up our alumni community. I thank each of you for taking the time to share your expertise with us tonight. Please join me in thanking them. This spring, Northwestern launched the campaign, We Will, the Campaign for Northwestern, to ensure that our current students and future students have the opportunities just like this to shine, whether in media, journalism, or any professional field they so choose. One of our goals for this campaign is to broaden and deepen our base of support. We have a goal to reach 141,000 unique donors and raise $3.75 billion to accomplish the ambitions of the university's strategic plan. We ask that each of you give every year at a level that's meaningful for you. And members of our Washington, D.C. Regional Committee are with us this evening and are identified by the purple ribbons that they wear. I encourage you to engage them in a conversation. I also would be remiss to remind you if anyone with a purple name tag is a member of the D.C. Club, and I encourage you to talk to them about ways to get involved in the D.C. area. And now, it's my extreme pleasure to introduce our leader in the field of journalism, Brad Ham, the Dean of Medill School of Journalism, Media, Integrated Marketing, Communications. Brad has been leading us since 2012 and is an expert in media history, international communications, and agenda-setting theory. Please join me in welcoming Dean Ham.
What a terrific crowd. We were, you know, sometimes on non-presidential years, you wonder whether it'll be interesting enough to have a lot of people out. I think it was interesting enough in all sorts of ways. We have a terrific panel, and I also appreciate the fact that many of them are coming from really just working up until the last minute. As you know, these jobs, as we talk with journalists, these jobs involve everything you check off. Do I work mornings? Yes. Nights? Yes. Holidays? Yes. Snow days? Yes. Weekends? Yes, absolutely. But there is incredible excitement to what they do, and I think we appreciate the fact that they've had very difficult schedules, but they're here tonight to share their stories. You might know or not know that Medill has had a Washington, D.C. presence for 50 years. Primarily for our graduate program. We're a couple of blocks from here, and so every quarter there are Northwestern and Medill students in D.C. reporting from all over. They covered the election. They went to 4 different states. They worked with different media, and I encourage you to, if you go online, just to look for the Medill D.C. election coverage, and some of it is appearing in the media that you view. So we have a strong year-round presence here, and almost many of the people who cover here today, including now undergraduate students are eligible for DC, have come through this program. One note, because many of you have asked about it, obviously Medill is the home of James Foley, and we will have a memorial service on campus in 2 weeks for Jim Foley. And he did participate in the DC program here. He came through and had part of his training here. We we held our memorial service at the request of the family because they just did their event a couple of weeks ago, and his mother and grandmother will join Medill and Northwestern on campus at Alice Millar Chapel in about 2 weeks. But we have a tremendous group of students here regularly, and if you would like to reach out to them, if you would like to participate with our program here, we encourage you. We're here today to learn about all, we hope, the inside information on what we watched from a distance, many of us. I'm thrilled that they've come together, and also that the moderator is here today. A number of the people who are on the panel participate regularly in coming back to campus, speaking to students and being involved, and I encourage you to do that too. We'd always love to see you in Evanston. We'll excuse you from there in the winter months, which is sort of now until May, but any other time you're welcome, especially around homecoming before it snows each year. So Peter Alexander is going to be the moderator tonight. It's terrific and a big friend of Northwestern and Medill. Peter is named National Correspondent for NBC News in May, expanding his previous role as White House Correspondent. He reports for all platforms, including NBC Nightly News, Today, Dateline, MSNBC, and has covered stories around the world. He is also a recipient of the prestigious Edward R. Murrow Award, and the Edward R. Murrow Room is across the hall. Please join me in welcoming Peter Alexander.
Hi, everybody. Thank you guys for including us tonight. Just as a point of privilege, I want to say how proud I am to share this podium with this group right now. When I was telling people about this evening and what we had in store tonight, and they said, "Oh, a Northwestern event. Like, who's going to show for that thing? Who do you have?" And I named off the crowd of journalists that are going to be speaking with you tonight, and they were like, "Oh, that's legit. Oh, that's real. Oh, okay, no, that's a real deal event." So this should be a special one, and we appreciate you being with us. I'll ask some questions as we go through this conversation tonight, but we want to engage you because obviously your questions are the most important ones this evening as well. We'll try to share some personal anecdotes from the campaign trail and from inside the White House. We'll try to limit our wave, political tsunami, political typhoon, and other inclement weather references as best we can this evening. But with that said, we'll get things started. As we see this group here, obviously, you know my friend Kelly O'Donnell from NBC News, Elisabeth Bumiller. Well, we'll let them introduce themselves. Why don't we do that very quickly? What if we do just a short introduction for each individual for about 20 seconds each? Kel, go ahead.
Well, I'm Kelly O'Donnell from NBC and a proud NU alum, and I cover Capitol Hill for NBC News. I've previously covered the White House and all manner of things from being based in Los Angeles and New York and time overseas. I love elections. I love campaign seasons. I'm on that sugar high after a few days of being on the road where I'm part sleep deprived and part fired up about what comes next. So we're excited to tell you some of our behind the scenes stories and to hear what you have to say as well.
Great. My name is Elisabeth Bumiller. I am the New York Times Deputy Washington Bureau Chief. I know Kelly from the 2008 McCain campaign. We can tell lots of stories from that campaign. And I also wanted to give a shout out to 2 Northwestern alums from the Washington program who work for the New York Times as news assistant, Elena Schneider, and Emery Wiedemann, who's we call her our junior reporter, which is a terrible title. She's more than that. But I hope they're here tonight. So the point is that if you go to Northwestern's Washington program, we always look at people in that program for young hires in the Washington Bureau, and they're great. And I've covered the White House, the Pentagon. I wrote a book about Condi Rice at the State Department, covered City Hall. I'm now in the black hole of editing in the New York Times Washington Bureau. I actually really enjoy it. People said, "Did you really want to do that?" I asked for it. I really enjoy it. I edit a lot of reporters and a lot of topics I used to write about myself. That's it.
Great.
I'm David Chalian. I'm the political director at CNN. I oversee all the political coverage across all of CNN's platforms, shows, and online. I have done that job at ABC News, at the PBS NewsHour. I have just also come off the sleepless and week that this is, but hopefully I got enough sleep last night that my brain is back in my head to participate in this panel with these esteemed journalists. So happy to be here.
Well, don't let David fool you. He's the only one who showed up with exit poll data in front of him tonight. I'm Julie Pace. I'm the chief White House correspondent for the Associated Press, proud Northwestern graduate. My job at the White House means that I am covering the guy who is going to become increasingly irrelevant. So if anybody knows of a new beat to cover, let me know. I started covering Obama during the 2008 campaign, moved to the White House when he was inaugurated in 2009. And I remember coming to this panel after the 2008 election and just being wowed by the Northwestern alums. So I'm very happy to be up here as part of it this time.
Tough acts to follow, to my right. My name is Shira T. Center. I'm the politics editor at Roll Call. I've covered Congress, which is my specialty, and campaigns for the last 10 years or so, everywhere from New Hampshire to Alaska and a whole lot of flyover country in between, and it's a lot of fun trips and anecdotes from the campaign trail. Most recently, this past spring, I served as a resident fellow at Harvard's Institute of Politics, where I led kind of a series of discussions on gender, media, and the midterm elections.
It's a halfway decent group that we've gathered here this evening. So to get things started in the business, you know, we like to not bury the lead. So just as we introduce this topic, I'd like to address to each of the individuals that are up here tonight, perhaps the question is, what's one thing that you heard in the course of the recent days since what occurred, since this landslide election, as it were? What's one little piece of information that you heard that really struck you, beyond what we've all seemed to have read at this point? What's one thing that struck you? Kelly, we'll start with you.
Well, I think now it's about expectations. The public spoke. The results are largely in. Few seats are still being determined. And I think what we have to watch for is the expectation gap. People voted for reasons that varied, sending a message, in some cases expressing anger, in some cases wanting to solidify an outcome like a Republican Senate. And I think when we have then since heard from McConnell and Boehner, some of what they said sounded reminiscent of a time prior to the election. And I think there's a real question about what can be delivered now that the Republicans will have all the keys to Congress in terms of driving that train forward. So I think expectations are going to be an issue.
Talk about that. Elizabeth, you go ahead.
I'm no longer on the campaign, so I don't hear anything. I hear from.
But you read a lot.
I am over in Farragut Square. The one thing that struck me the most in the last couple of days is something that was in the front, the lead of the story, the lead story in the New York Times this morning, and it was by Julie Davis and Peter Baker, and I edited it last night. It was a great story, but they had a great line on it, which was that Obama yesterday at his press conference, Republicans accused him of reaching out with one hand to them and slapping them with the other. I think that was a great line because it really, and also the Republicans were doing it to Obama. So you have this disconnect of, we want to work with you, but don't you try and push immigration down our throats. And Obama said, I want to work with you, but I'm going to do immigration. And so I think that's the interesting thing that we're going to be covering in the next weeks as we see how that plays out.
As Brian Williams said to start the NBC Nightly News tonight, he said, the honeymoon is now over. David, go ahead.
Along the lines of what Elisabeth said, I do think that despite the rhetoric that President Obama and Mitch McConnell, a little less so John Boehner today, put out there about reaching out, I was taken aback by how quickly the election was ignored by everyone and how they quickly reverted back into their corners. I thought there would at least be a week or two of us trying to figure out, oh, there are going to be areas of compromise. They are going to do X, Y, and Z. And, you know, in the last 24 hours, I'm pretty convinced that nothing is going to change much in terms of the gridlock. So that took me by surprise a little bit. Perhaps I was a little too naive.
Julie, you get the first question to the president most days at the White House, as you did just yesterday. So what's something that we didn't see on TV that you heard behind the scenes that sort of struck you?
Well, the thing I'm struck with, and you'll, I think, notice a theme in what we're all saying here, is just how much the White House feels the same after this really devastating defeat for the president's party. The staff is still there, and they're going to stay there pretty much through the end of the year and into next year. The president's priorities look very much the same as what they were before this election. Even when you talk about possible areas of compromise, there are things that the president has been wanting to work on for several years. It just feels the same, and it's pretty amazing, I think, when you look at an election result that was so bad for his party and so tumultuous for Washington, that you can have that on Tuesday, and on Wednesday everyone wakes up and kind of just moves along.
Shira?
Yeah, so I love covering House races. I'm probably the only person in this room who can say that. But I think they're interesting because they're indicative often of a larger trend, right? So one of my, sensing this wave was, I'm not supposed to use the word wave, okay. Sensing this movement, I guess, this red tide or whatever is going to, is coming along.
That's still oceanic, so I think you're...
My reporters started calling the campaign committees. These are the people who run most of the House campaigns, and they call the Democrats and they try and get a sense of how bad it's going to be for them, and asking about some of these races that turned out to be races out of nowhere. Jim Costa in California, a race in Nevada, Louise Slaughter up in Buffalo area near New York, right? They turned out to have very close races. So then you call the Republicans after the election, and you expect them to say like, oh yeah, we saw that coming. We were really smart about that. And you call them at the Republican committees, and they're like, yeah, we had no idea that was a race. We didn't know that was going to break. So that's always very striking to me. It's that much of a surprise, even to the party that's benefited very much from Tuesday night, that they didn't see it coming as that big.
So I want to talk, for me, I think the one thing that struck me, and I was reporting this last night, is that this is now being described in some ways, the new Senate Republican freshman class, as a youth invasion of sorts. The average age of that class is 49.8 years old, which is remarkable by comparison, 62 years before that. But I think it's kind of striking, and I suspect it will be part of the conversation tonight, is the fact that not too many years ago, when President Obama rode that wave into the White House, the conversation was all about a new generation of Democrats, and these Obama Democrats, these young folks who would come in, their ranks would swell across the country. And now all of a sudden the conversation is, who's on the bench? Where are the young folks in the Democratic Party? The Republican Party now all of a sudden has that energy. So things change very rapidly. Specifically, I want to get a sense from you guys about some of the defining moments, some of the things that you witnessed that you think really were tipping points in this. And we can date back. Kelly and I were speaking about this earlier, not too far from here. Eric Cantor, of course, that was part of the midterms when he got knocked off not too many months back. And we'll bounce around so we don't just keep walking down the line. But Kelly, I know you just got back from She started in Kansas with Greg Orman and Pat Roberts, then took the shuttle from Kansas to Detroit to Kentucky, because obviously the NBC corporate jet was not available that night to cover Mitch McConnell's news conference. But you spent a lot of time in Kansas, and I just want to get a sense. Obviously, Greg Orman, he became a name who's not going to come to Washington, but he did represent something. So what do you think the message that we leave Kansas with was?
Well, one of the interesting things, Greg Orman is a 45-year-old self-made businessman who had enormous success in creating businesses and telling voters in part what they wanted to hear and what I think he really believed, that there could be a place for an independent in the structure of the Senate to change things. He was dynamic. He had very successful TV ads that were funny. Humor always works in campaigns. People knew about him, liked him, were intrigued by him. And as I would go from place to place, I often ask people what their own vote is, and then sometimes I will say, okay, apart from how you might vote, what do you think will happen? And again, I heard, well, Pat Roberts is going to win. And that told me a lot. So when the polls had Greg Orman up 10, which was substantial, earth-shaking, the kind of thing where other Republicans were very angry at Pat Roberts, who just won his 4th term. Pat Roberts is a very funny person on the Senate floor, has one of those Midwestern senses of humor that makes him very engaging in that way, but really didn't connect in the modern way of politics where people have a big personality or come across on their television ads or televised debates in a way that is engaging. But every time someone said to me, oh, but Pat Roberts is going to win, and the polls didn't suggest that, I was struck by it, and I would say, well, why? Well, he may not deserve to win, but he's going to win. The party will come and save him. And what really did happen was Greg Orman had a conversation people wanted to have. It extends far beyond Kansas about what's wrong with a two-party system or what's wrong with how those in those two parties have been behaving. But when it came down to issues, people still most related to the record Pat Roberts had. Again, we're talking Kansas, where it is more conservative. And on issues, they felt comfortable with him. You may have heard he had problems with residency. Owns a property in Kansas, doesn't live in it, rents it out. That was nothing new to people in Kansas. It was skillfully used against him in a primary, but it wasn't something that was going to change how they voted, even though those of us on the outside would say, oh, that residency problem, that's really going to doom Pat Roberts. Well, no, not there. That was not a new piece of information for people. Didn't mean they liked it, that he didn't have a place that would be a regular place to stay. But I think people were, they'd already factored that in. So what I was struck by is what people want to talk about in a campaign season, what their aspirations for politics are in terms of let's all work together, let's get along, is in one sort of area. And on election day, people revert to things they've always known, always believed, always expected. And he won by 11 points. So I wasn't surprised by the outcome. Greg Orman was one of the great stories of this election season. And then when I was in Virginia 7 with the Cantor loss, many of us were caught off guard by that. Person after person I spoke to, including Eric Cantor, person after person I spoke to said, well, we really thought he was more about his national ambition than our district. It was so consistent. It's like, how did we not see that? And it was a good old-fashioned drubbing. He was really pushed out of office.
I think a lot of people that live around here would agree that the pollsters in Virginia have some work to do. Virginia struggled not just once in the midterms, but twice. Obviously, the Mark Warner race was a whole heck of a lot closer than any of us anticipated. David, to you, one of the other defining moments, of course, was the hog-castrating, Harley-riding war veteran Joni Ernst, who I acknowledge as someone who works for the mainstream media, that is going to become a face we're going to talk a lot about because she has a unique charisma, and she was when everybody did their evening newscast that night and the Today Show or morning broadcast the next day, we all started with Joni Ernst. Yeah, so what is it about her?
Well, hands down, she was the best character of the cycle, and we're always looking for a good character. But I think she also represented, well, a couple things. One, she represents what you were speaking of, a youthful energy that's coming into the Senate. I mean, this is a young woman or a younger woman.
She's to be 35 to run for the Senate, so that we start a little.
I think she's 44. 44.
Yeah.
She's 44. Okay.
Does that count?
I'm trying to feel young.
Now that I'm 40, I try to call. I'm 41. I try to call everybody. But she's a younger person in the Senate. I think that is one thing that makes her instantly a character to follow, someone that can be there for a while. She also navigated the primary season really, really skillfully. And if you want to talk about things that we're obsessed with, it's somebody who can navigate a Republican primary in Iowa because it gives us clues to perhaps where the Iowa Republican electorate is for the next presidential cycle. And I think that she very skillfully bridged the Tea Party establishment divide, and I think it represented a larger story of how one of the reasons Republicans were very successful this cycle. They were very, very disciplined about their candidates and the committees here in town, the establishment, playing in these primaries to make sure that, you know, the Todd Akins of the world, the Richard Murdochs of the world from previous cycles, these Republican candidates that kind of imploded on them, were not in the general election this time. And that took a lot of discipline and a lot of work, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. Joni Ernst, you know, she had Mitt Romney's support early on, so she had that establishment piece, but she had the Sarah Palin love and the Tea Party grassroots energy. That was a key thing to watch. But obviously, Peter, when you're in that kind of crowded primary and you put up an ad that is as magical as, like, castrating pigs, I mean, it just, when you want to break through the clutter and you can do that with one ad, as that ad did, that becomes a defining moment in a campaign, as it did for her. It got her a lot of attention. It brought in a lot of money for her, and it really put her on the map, that one ad. And it never made a cartoon character of her. She was able to use it to get on the map, but then she was able to show herself to be a very serious contender, and she made history by being the first woman from the state of Iowa ever elected to serve in Washington.
You get James Earl Jones to castrate hogs and you say, this is CNN, you might be onto something. That's all we're missing. We'll call Jeff Zucker with that thought. Shira, for you on the House side, I want to get a sense about, I think one of the points I want to pick up is what David said about the real discipline that went in, the efforts that went in on the Republican side in particular to make sure that they got the kind of candidates in these races that they needed to ultimately do what they did on Tuesday night.
Yeah, well, this isn't a House side, but it's a Senate side anecdote. The Washington Post had a great piece looking back at all these things Senate Republicans did to prepare. And I'd be curious, how many people in this audience have heard of a guy named Chris McDaniel? Interesting. So Chris McDaniel was a huge part of all of our lives for about 6 weeks there, at least at the roll call newsroom. He beat Thad Cochran, the senior senator from Mississippi, in the primary, but it went to a runoff, right? And Thad Cochran stunned everyone by winning that runoff, right? Odds were definitely against Thad Cochran, and he did it kind of miraculously by getting African-American support in Mississippi in a Republican runoff. Chris McDaniel kept challenging the election for weeks and weeks. I think he finally conceded 2 weeks ago, right? Anyway, so, I tell this story because the NRSC, the National Republican Senatorial Committee, to kind of prepare to avoid a lot of these mostly Tea Party-backed candidates that spoiled their primaries in the future, what they did, according to the story, was had a list of all the things Chris McDaniel had said. He was a state senator, but he also had his own radio show, which means he said a lot of stuff, and he's had the need to fill up a lot of airtime saying maybe not so smart things when you clip it into quotes, right? So they started playing all these things, and it was a way to generate interest from donors and also the establishment. They were very much afraid of having this guy running as their nominee in Mississippi. So they went around just playing what this guy said over and over again to other Republicans to get their support for the committee and also Thad Cochran in Mississippi, right? And that's the kind of thing that you do, I think, very smartly to make sure you get the right candidate.
As we talk, Julie, about defining moments outside events and mistakes within the White House, what do they sort of, or do they, concede is a defining moment or mistake that ultimately is to blame for a lot of what we witnessed?
Well, some of you may remember that the president, I think it was in October, gave a speech at a little university just north of Chicago. He was at Northwestern, and
Aren't you proud that we have a soundbite?
I know, I love it. I love it. It's perfect. It's perfect. It works for this crowd, works everywhere. This was a period of time where the president wasn't welcome on the campaign trail, but the White House was trying to find things for him to do that reflected the message that he wanted to send in this campaign. So he went to Northwestern, and he was going to give this big economic speech. And I really can't remember much of what he said in this economic speech, except for one line, where he said, "My name's not on the ballot, but my policies are." It wasn't a gaffe. He wasn't ad-libbing. It was in the prepared remarks. This is something he intended to say. He clearly wanted to say. It was something that aides had said privately. It was not necessarily a surprise that he thought this, but the fact that he said it so clearly and that he intended to say it at that point in the campaign was really pretty devastating for Democrats, and officials now will admit that that was not their smartest move. It played right into what Republicans had been saying for months, which is that, Kay Hagan in North Carolina or Mary Landrieu in Louisiana can tell you all they want, that they're an independent candidate, that they're not just a rubber stamp for the Democrats and for President Obama, but if you vote for them, you're voting for Barack Obama's policies. And you know how you know that? He just told you that. And it showed up in ads immediately. We were hearing instantly from Republicans, and he just couldn't shake it. Democrats couldn't shake it. In the news conference yesterday, I asked him about this. You said this. Do you feel like this was a repudiation of your policies then? He sort of dodged it. He was kind of in a sunny mood yesterday. But I do think that an interesting thing that the White House has to come to grips with is that even if the president's policies in isolation may be popular, they can look at their poll numbers on things like minimum wage that show that when policies are associated with him, they're not popular and Democrats lose. And that's a tough position to be in at this point in his presidency.
In terms of the...
sorry.
No, go ahead, Dave.
I want to add one quick detail to that. There's a Democratic operative in town who worked on Senate races. As soon as the president said that, and then every day thereafter, because as Julie's saying, it was in every ad. It also happened when all the debates were starting in all of these campaigns. So it was the first answer in every debate out of every Republican candidate's mouth. This operative would clip it on YouTube and send it to the White House staff just to remind them of how upset they were that the president had made this gaffe.
of. I was filling in for one of our colleagues, so I was on that White House trip, and I, of course, raised my hand when it's the president speaking at Northwestern. Yes, I'll gladly go. And as I was sitting in the back of the auditorium there, Khan Auditorium, since we all know it,
Heyo.
when he said it, occasionally I have that as if I was watching him on TV moment, and I said something out loud when normally I wouldn't. I was like, oh, one of those. Because it was so clearly problematic for candidates. And I was shocked, frankly, that it got through the script writing process of his speech, the text writing process. And I went and immediately double-checked. As Julie said, it was in that text. And because I'd been tweeting that I was there, ping, 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 my email hits, and I had Republicans saying, did he riff that, or did he actually say it? Because he had, especially he was comfortable at Northwestern and comfortable with people he knew, and said a few other things earlier in the speech that were not a part of the text, nothing that significant, but he had gone off text a bit. And so it was a moment that I think will really be one of those we look back on, because so many Democratic candidates wanted a chance to distance themselves and to make an argument. And in those couple of sentences, he took all of the wind out of that, and to his own detriment in the sense that he needs Democrats to help him in the Senate.
As it turns out, we at Northwestern have a contact in President Obama's speechwriting office. Y'all may be aware, so we could certainly follow up on that a little bit later. But as some added color to this conversation, I think one thing that's interesting that Kelly alluded to that I think you guys, for part of the inside our world experience, may appreciate is that often when the president delivers remarks, or when a lot of folks, frankly, deliver remarks, we get the remarks in advance, embargoed, of course, that we can't share, but it allows people who are writing for print to prepare what they're going to write, to get a sense of where things are going, for us in the television business to have an idea of what sound bites we're likely to want to clip. But what's most compelling is when we log it, we bold or underline or italicize the words that aren't in the script, because that's where you feel like you get a real taste of what the president's actually thinking or really wants to get across, or not the part that he practiced, but the part that was perhaps in his heart. Elizabeth?
Can I ask a question of my colleagues? Because I step back. I'm not covering the nitty-gritty every day of the back and forth, every single word. And I have to say, what struck me in all the coverage recently was, again, the deficit is in half. Unemployment is below 6%. Gas prices are low. I realize the economic recovery, it's been slow, but it's happening. There's been growth in the United States. So, and I understand that the economic recovery has not hit everybody. In fact, it hasn't hit the vast majority of the middle class. But so, stock market is booming. So, you all are on the campaign trail all the time. So, what exactly? And his policies, as you point out, are not all that unpopular. Yes, the Affordable Care Act is unpopular in large parts of the country, but what exactly is it that you see on the campaign trail that is so abominable to these Democrats that you're describing?
Well, in the cycle, it was fear. I think that especially some of the Democrats who thought they were vulnerable, and they proved to be vulnerable, were afraid of the association, because so often it really boils down to the bumper sticker, the soundbite on their local evening news, and what is clipped and sent about to interest groups, fundraising, and so forth. All of those other forces that come to play. And they don't get a chance to say it in a full paragraph about what they support and don't support with the president. And I think that made it difficult. I also think because Senator Harry Reid did not allow votes on things not typically favorable to Democrats, they didn't get a chance in many instances to be able to say where they voted separately from the president. So that gave Republicans the chance to do the upper 99s. 97% of the time voted with President Obama. 99% of the time voted with President Obama. It was difficult for them to distinguish themselves in ways that mattered in their home states, and that was difficult.
But what is it in the rest of the country that's so objectionable? I would love to hear this. You're out there. What do you hear from people?
Well, I think one thing we have to also consider is, we talk about, the mandate famously after 2004 in Bush's words, right? I mean, we can't look at what happened on Tuesday night, got my days confused, as a mandate necessarily, because in many ways, the map, it was full of southern states who already thought poorly of the president, who already chose not to elect him or reelect him.
So we shouldn't. States, right?
Right. So, yeah, but I think it means they already didn't like him, right? So I think the other thing, and Kelly kind of hit on this a bit, is, there wasn't an October surprise. People thought it was Ebola. I don't think it was Ebola. I think the October surprise was more the culmination of a series of events. Everyone in the world was talking about Ferguson in August, right, except those of us in DC. And it was a general sense of insecurity, especially among women voters. And at the end, a lot of them didn't show up, right? This is what exit polling shows. Huge drop-offs from presidential years to midterms. And because of that, it wasn't that they necessarily disliked the president, but because of these events, they felt, voters in general felt insecure, and they stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt.
Right, so it was Ebola, it was ISIS, it was, and Ferguson all piled in the, yes. But
I think there's certainly a segment of the population that just does not like Barack Obama. Either they don't like him because of his policies or they don't like him personally. But there is probably an even larger section of the population that just is unhappy with Washington. And you have a Democratic president, you have Democrats in charge of the Senate. And if you want to vote, if you decide to actually show up at the voting booth and express your anger in some way, you're going to express it against the party that's in charge, even if maybe you like their policies broadly. That's really your outlet for expressing anger. It doesn't necessarily mean they agree with Republicans on everything. It's just that's almost a protest vote.
David, you have the polling numbers, so I want you to go to the data.
I will, but I also think you answered your own question, Elizabeth, in saying that you understand that the economic recovery has not been felt by everybody and largely the middle class. That is the thing. So you've got, the exit polls show that 65% of the country says we're on the wrong track. That's the highest recorded in exit polls, or the second highest recorded in exit polls since 1990 in terms of that. I think it was only higher in 2008, actually, when Barack Obama got elected, ironically. And you have 78% of voters on Tuesday night saying that they are worried about the economy in the next year. I mean, that is, so even if you agree with the policies, that is a tough level of concern among voters to break through. And I think, I would say the two most consequential things that happened in this cycle, one, the failure of the Obamacare website last fall. I think that ripped off any leftover level of support for him after his reelect to a level that he was not going to be able to recover from as he headed into the 6th year and stuff. So I think that was the first key thing that happened, is that really sent him spiraling downward. He recovered a little bit in January and February. And then ISIS, I think, more so than Ebola, more so than Ferguson. I think when the beheadings happened and the country, there was a new level of fear entered the conversation. Already there was so much suspect among voters in whether government can do anything and accomplish it, and all of a sudden I think that, and I don't just think this is what Republican and Democratic pollsters will tell you they saw in their data as the campaign was ongoing. The moment the ISIS thing happened, this started collapsing for the Democrats and for the president's party.
I would also add the Veterans Affairs problem. I covered a lot of that, and very often people who are cared for at those hospitals would be typical Democratic voters in depending on where you are. And I talked to many of their families and many of the veterans who were beyond disappointed. They were accustomed and almost been conditioned to less than ideal standards, but when they saw the breadth of how government had failed to do its job well, and the agencies had failed, whether it's the CDC and some fumbling about what the Ebola issues were, to some of these other things, that created a certain mistrust of institutions, not so much parties, but the institutions we've relied on were under a lot of attack.
I think you hit on it right there. I think all these things fit that central theme. I think the Secret Service was sort of like the punctuation mark at the end of this, because these were the institutions more than any other in which we most trusted. And ultimately, when even the Secret Service was being questioned.
We were talking at the office when the Republicans were using the Secret Service against Obama. That they're not. That was amazing. Yeah. That they were criticizing him for having a Secret Service that wasn't protecting him properly. So that was like. That worked for them, right?
Yeah, no doubt. I was the guy in front of the White House a couple days ago for the Today Show who couldn't find my Secret Service credential, and it was like shuffling through my bag in the dark at like 5:45 in the morning. Note to self, not for doing again. I want to get to some of the personal stories from you guys about your experiences in the course of the last however many months, perhaps, Kelly, from you on the road and for you guys behind the scenes, but to get a sense of some of the things that you witnessed that sort of defied the conventional wisdom. They were opposite what a lot of us, I think, believed was the case, but things that you think sort of broke ranks with that. So I guess, Shira, there's some thoughts. I'm riffing myself here. I didn't warn you guys with these questions. But are there any things that sort of struck you in that way?
We traffic in conventional wisdom. What are we going to do? Somebody start.
Let's see. Well, I think sometimes the thing that always strikes me when, you know, as we pour through the results of a lot of these congressional races is how much and how little running a good campaign matters, right? Sometimes you see people running really, this is, you know, House and Senate races, right? Sometimes you see people running really good campaigns, like Gwen Graham ousted a Republican incumbent in the Florida Panhandle this cycle. Like, that's a really good campaign, right, to be able to do that. And she, you know, and it obviously showed, right? Any other candidate, I think, she's the daughter of a former governor and senator with the same name, it would be hard to see them ousting a Republican incumbent. But then also you see other incumbents who run great campaigns and they don't, you know, they lose by double digits. You know, I don't think that answers your question directly, but.
Well, I guess, are there any things that would make people see the race a little bit differently? I'm just trying to, you know, I think
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
And I'll take the hat tip from Shira because she mentioned Mississippi. I spent time in Mississippi during the primary season where Thad Cochran, who we have mentioned, was presumed to be defeated by this young and more dynamic Chris McDaniel. And I was struck by going into some of the places we typically visit. We talk to folks in diners, you'll see that on television, or basically what I do is I call it the taxi cab driver test. From the moment I land, I speak to the taxi cab driver, I talk to the folks who work at the hotel where we're staying, any restaurant we go into, if we need to stop and get gas for the rental car, if we have one, we talk to folks there. So I'm talking to people who are not attending political events, because people at political events are certainly, it's important to talk to them too, but you get a different impression if you're talking to people who are not directly engaged in political events. And I went to a church in Mississippi, and I was struck by the work that the Thad Cochran team, mostly it was National Republicans, did to try to get the African American communities and churches to vote for him. And they had a story to tell. And that story was his long support for education in the state. And the other candidate had, as we talked about his radio history, had said a lot of very inflammatory things. I'm going to leave it at that. And the thoughtfulness of the voters in churches who had a sense of what the power of the ballot is, and in a state like Mississippi that is still subjected to aspects of the Voting Rights Act, they were going to show up. Young men, young women, senior citizens, and it was quite moving to me as somebody who covers politics to see people who showed up and waited in lines in the ballot box to vote because they wanted to send a message. They wanted to reward someone that they believed had done some good things. These were Democrats. There was one fellow, 30-something guy, said, I got to call my dad and tell him I'm voting for a Republican. And he did so because they knew in the landscape of that moment, there was not a chance the Democrat was going to win. So it was a case of lesser of choices, fill in your own blanks. But to see how they thought it through, had reasons for why they wanted to do this, and they made the absolute critical difference in returning him to the Senate. And one of the questions I will have in looking at what he does in the next Congress is how attentive will he be to those issues and those concerns?
Right. I have one sort of. We started out this campaign talking about all, you know, again, another potential year of the woman, all these really powerhouse, interesting, new, energetic women candidates, you know, not just Joni Ernst, but Allison Grimes, Michelle Nunn. And then if you look at the numbers now, the Senate had 20 women before this campaign, and it looks like it will have 20 women after this campaign. If Mary Landrieu wins in Louisiana, not clear, it'll be 21, not exactly a big increase. There were 79 women in the House before this. Looks like there'll be 8. No, no.
100
it's
total.
The two chambers.
Yeah.
Yeah, 79 in the House, 85 to 86, depending on how various elections pan out after it's over. Not exactly a big increase. So 2014 was not the year of the woman.
Yeah, so David, what was it? It was the year of the what?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Well, yeah.
The angry voter.
Yeah, it was the year of the angry voter. I mean, this is. But there is something we learned about the electorate this year, and you're hearing a lot of conversation about it, and I think it's important to note there's all this talk when you talk about a midterm electorate versus a presidential electorate, and how Republicans get favored in midterm electorate because it's an older electorate, it's a whiter electorate, which is true. But I just do want to read you some statistics here. Tuesday's electorate was
The only one who can.
Thank you. Tuesday's electorate was 75% white. Okay. In 2006 midterms, I'm just going to read midterms. Forget presidential years for a moment. 2006 midterms, the electorate was 79% white. In the 2010 midterms, it was 77% white. This midterm, it was 75% white. So I say that to say this is not. This will not be a long-term solution for Republicans to just hang on to the notion that midterms are going to be their savior, because we're going to see this happen just like we are at the presidential level, just not as dramatically, but the electorate is going to continue to get less white, both in midterm years and then more dramatically in presidential years. And so trust me, no politician is hearing this for the first time here. Look at what Rand Paul is doing. Look at, this is, our country is changing before our eyes, and our politicians on both sides are responding to it and adapting to it in really, really interesting ways. And so I do think that we overtalk, I think, the difference between, and it's a valid difference between presidential and midterm electorate, but I still think you can see the changing makeup of the country. And that's why when you talk about that very deep bench on the Republican side, I think that's a real core strength for them right now, to have younger folks who can appeal to a changing country and who are really working to do that. Chris Christie also, another example. The Democrats, which obviously the non-white constituencies favor them, they do not have a bench yet that has shown us how they're going to continue to reach out in new ways to the changing shape of the country.
Which for me makes immigration an interesting issue. But Julie, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think this speaks to something of a legacy matter for Barack Obama. He has shown this ability to bring out coalitions in 2008 and 2012 that simply didn't show up in previous presidential years, midterms aside. But the promise of Barack Obama politically was not just that he could get people engaged in the process in presidential elections. It was supposed to be that he could get people engaged in politics more broadly. And I think that that's a real question for him and about him as president. Why is it that people only show up to vote for Democrats when he's on the ballot? Why can't he inspire people to show up and vote for his policies when he's not on the ballot? And when you talk to Democrats over the last couple of days, they have this sense that even though the demographics favor them in presidential elections, that they can't simply just count on that alone, that perhaps they've taken that for granted to some degree, that there is going to have to be a reinvigorated ground effort, that they're going to have to show people that Barack Obama is not going to be on the ballot in 2016. We know that for sure. It's not going to happen. How do you show people that whoever you put up in 2016 is worthy of their vote, not only in that year, but in the midterm election that follows?
So speaking of 2016, Elisabeth, your thought on, so what does Rand Paul, you'll appreciate, tweeted today 5 separate pictures of Hillary Clinton on the campaign trail with candidates, all of whom lost, hugging, embracing, smiling, with the hashtag Hillary's Losers. So I just want to get a sense from you what the impact is of this. We have some sense of the impact on the president's final 2 years.
Right.
What's the impact on the Clintons, or Hillary Clinton and her husband?
Obviously, none of their candidates, most of their candidates didn't. Did any of their candidates win?
Jean Shaheen.
Yeah, okay.
Jean, sure.
Okay, so I would say, and I covered Hillary Clinton's first race for Senate in 2000. I mean, I was covering Giuliani at the time, but so I think we could say it doesn't matter that much. I think what matters, and we're having a story about this tomorrow, is just that this has totally gotten her going. You know, she realizes that campaign, that nation campaign, realizes it cannot sit around. And the Democrats...
That's in the paper tomorrow?
I hope it's not...
Yeah, we've got to go file.
That's hardly news. That's why I said it. Right. So I wouldn't have...
I'm looking for scoops wherever I can get them from Elisabeth.
They're moving, you know, and so she also, the Democrats who support her will say that they think that this, you know, the silver lining here is that this will make it easier for her to separate herself from Obama very quickly and make herself a different politician. But they realize they have to move very fast now, and that this midterms have opened up this huge Republican field that everybody's going to jump in. Lots of Republicans saw this as you know, a reason for them to run. So that's what I would say.
So Shira, what will you be watching in the next 2 years? What should we be focused on? What are the moments to come, or the, you know?
Well, a few things. Obviously, what happens with immigration, right? And if he does executive action and how it works and what kind of corner he backs House Republicans in by doing that, and if Hillary decides which side she goes on that. You know, I'm not a Hillary specialist, right? There are reporters in this town who have been covering Hillary Clinton for decades, or, you know, for the last year. I'm not one of those people, but I can say from the perspective of covering congressional Democrats that, you know, they are putting a whole lot of stock in what she can do for the Democratic Party, right? There's no question that Barack Obama is going to leave the Democratic Party worse off than he found it. Just looking at the stats, losing 70 House seats over the course of his career, all these things, right? Like Senate Democrats had the majority when he came in. He's leaving, they're in the minority, right? He's leaving the party worse than he found it. But congressional Democrats really look at the Clinton coalition, including Latinos who look upon Hillary Clinton very favorably, as this kind of savior that's going to bring them into power every couple years. And I think that's a very dangerous position for the party to be in, because there is almost no bench underneath her, right? What if she decides not to run? Right? I mean, who steps up in that place? Martin O'Malley? Probably not after Tuesday night. You know, it's a tough one. And beyond that, too, you're going to see, I think, even more drop-off in the ranks of members of Congress. A lot of Democrats who look at the next couple years, House Democrats will probably not get the majority back until 2022. I mean, anything can happen, but it's going to take another round of redistricting at this point because they're so far in the hole. Yep. Maybe they'll get really lucky in 2016, but I mean, again, it's just putting a whole lot of stock in one person and one candidate who is going to be out there on her own for 2 years if she announces in the next 6 weeks.
And those people like me who are trying to make plans for 2016 right now, just with my family and, you know, booking ahead because flights are cheap, you'll appreciate that Mitt Romney called dozens of Republicans on election night, and obviously anybody who covered the Romney campaign like myself is now getting phone calls from our bosses saying, have you checked in with some of your old friends at the Romney campaign? Not that that's new, but you know, there's a lot of interesting dynamics that are at play here. I want to get your questions in a moment, so hopefully you guys have thought of that a little bit, and we'll have you guys stand up, and I think there are a pair of mics in a moment, but maybe since this is largely a Medill group here, I want to ask a little question as it relates to journalism and to the media right now, and get a sense from you guys of how you, maybe not grade the media, but how the media did, and as importantly, perhaps what has changed in the way we cover campaigns that this Decision 2014 revealed. Any thoughts on that?
That's only what they call it at NBC, Decision 2014.
Well, as long as I have the podium, we're going to work that tonight.
America's election night or something like that. Well, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I don't want to do grades because that can get me in trouble. But I will say that we are learning about how to navigate the new iterations of social media and how they affect campaigns. When we were doing John McCain's campaign, YouTube had barely begun. There was no Twitter. There was no, and dare I say it, I saw Bob Dole the other day. I covered his '96 campaign. And I mean, I had not even a beeper at that point, let alone, I mean, you were calling on a landline when you got off the plane. It was crazy. So I think part of what we're doing is trying to find a way to reflect what those social network communities tell us, because there are viewers, there are readers, as well as being voters, and also trying to not let the clutter overwhelm the telling of a story. One of the things I love about being out on a campaign trail is to tell a story as it sits in front of me, not necessarily having to ping in all of the thoughts that exist in the social media universe. That's a real challenge.
You become an aggregator in a way that you
Yes,
never did
yeah,
before, because
yeah.
it's not the same sort of primary source reporting that it formerly was, because the press releases that you used to have to go to the local police station and pick up off the Xerox machine now physically come into your phone faster than you can keep track of them right now. Julie?
One thing I would say is that, as much as this is a tumultuous time for media and we're all trying to figure it out, the great thing is we are still trying to figure it out, and there's a lot of creativity out there. I work for the Associated Press, which is about as old and stodgy of a news organization as you could possibly think of, and we did great, fun things on election night. I was sitting in the Washington newsroom, and all of a sudden there was someone with an iPhone in front of me like, Julie, can you tell me in 15 seconds, what's going on right now? And I talked into this phone, and it showed up somewhere on the internet. And we did something, every hour we would run a little feature that was, 5 things you need to know for this next hour. And, I don't know if those were the things that readers were looking for, viewers were looking for, but we're trying, and it's exciting, and it's fun. And I think there's still a lot of great opportunity out there.
I would agree with Julie. Everything you hear is, oh, the media is dying and stuff, but I just was so struck by how much stuff the New York Times had on election night. You couldn't possibly read it all. It was all over the web, and I was also struck by, I love these little voter profiles we did on election day, because you can do that now with your iPhone. You can send a young reporter out. You don't need all the equipment anymore, and these pictures of voters, and then little testimonials from why they voted and what they were about. But we just couldn't do that even 5, 6 years ago.
And CNN had the world's first 24 box. I'm not sure, they talk about talking heads on the screen at once, like on CNBC, where all the guys are. They had 24 different people on the screen at one time. I was like, holy, that is, we got beat on that one. That was the real deal.
I mean, but look at how we covered.
We brought out the 5 box on nightly news, Peter. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
But look at how we all covered campaigns 10 years ago. That there wasn't as much coverage. So in this world where we're all, again, bemoaning the decline of the media, I don't feel like it was in decline on Tuesday night at all.
One other point, though, is there's more available. Not all of it is subjected to the thoughtful process of editor scrutiny in the role that Elisabeth has now. So you have to be, as a consumer, wary of what's out there. Mistakes happen. Sometimes intentional misinformation finds a home. So there's distribution. Not all of it is subjected to, the sort of journalism we want to practice.
David?
This is how I think of it. You mentioned going down to the police station and getting the press release, Peter.
Yeah.
And I do think, when I started in this business, right, the police scanner was a really important thing in the local TV news station that I worked in, right? You would listen to the scanner, it would be there at the assignment desk, and we would learn that there was an accident somewhere or an ambulance was going somewhere, and we would go and chase that and determine whether this was newsworthy, and then we would go and broadcast that on the air. And I think what has happened now is that, we're all listening to the scanner together. The audience, our viewers never knew the scanner existed. Now they listen to the police scanner in real time with us. And so what I think that requires of us, whereas our 2 major missions of speed and accuracy, both to be competitive but to have that highest quality of journalism, I think a third tenet now gets added to that in equal weight, which is transparency to the audience, that we just have to, in addition to being first and right, we also need to be transparent in about how we are getting all of that information to the viewer, reader, listener now, because you are all absorbing the process with us as we're doing it. So.
Shira, first of all, if you have questions, please go to the microphones, and we'll take those. But Shira, your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, there are kind of 2 ways I think I really saw them change the way we cover things, and one of them has to do a whole lot with Twitter, right? So We love Twitter at Roll Call. You could follow us at Roll Call. No, we love Twitter. And now, for example, when we cover press conferences, I send a reporter to write a story, and I send a reporter just to tweet the entire press conference. And I guarantee you, and it's great because the reporter can focus on the story, and you can get it in quickly, and it'll be fast and accurate. And the reporter who's tweeting, I guarantee more people are seeing those tweets than probably the story in the end. And even on primary night this year, we started tweeting our coverage and then running them it's called through a program called Cover It Live, and it lists all the tweets, and it's all these little anecdotes and details. And I think the news consumer is getting used to just taking this as a story instead of what used to be 450 words, 850 words, 1,000 words. The other difference, and David touched on this, is that everyone can be a reporter now. We sent a photographer. Roll Call has great photographers, 2 of them who cover Capitol Hill. All the lawmakers know them. They know all the lawmakers. We sent one of them to Kentucky to cover Mitch McConnell on election night. And our dream, our pie-in-the-sky dream, was to get the photographer in there when Mitch McConnell found out he was going to become majority leader, right? To get the expression on his face. If
Was
you're a
that your picture?
No, it wasn't. So
because I used it. Whoever got it, someone got it.
Someone got it, right? Maybe, well, I saw this morning in one of the news aggregation things that get sent around that McConnell's campaign manager's wife was in the room with them, and there's a photo of him going, yay, and smiling, right? And like that was the shot. Yeah. And of course, why on earth would they let a roll call photographer in who could probably get all these unflattering photos of him and his, all these things?
CC Pete Souza at the White House.
Yeah. Exactly. You could have, a trusted person who will only post the shot on Instagram that makes him look really great. So.
Pete Souza is the White House photographer, and as you guys are likely aware, there's been a lot of competition right now for access to this White House, because more often than not, when we desire being in a moment, you'll come in there, including the Ebola nurse not too long ago, and when the media was allowed in exclusively still photographers, so no video and no editorial, which is to say you can't ask a question because they didn't want to address the topic of the day. They just wanted a picture of the moment. But as we arrived in there, as it was communicated to us by our photographers, the White House press photographer was basically snapping portraits of the 2 hugging, and so they send a competing image before we even get what we think is a deserving image of an important.
The downside of all this instant, because they can send it out everywhere.
So we're going to go around and we'll challenge you to think succinctly, which I have failed in that effort. But if you'll introduce yourself briefly and then ask your question, sir.
I'm Robert Cooper from the Weinberg College, and my question is, what will be the impact on the Tea Party, if any?
Good question.
Somebody,
Shira.
You should take it.
So 4 years ago, I was on this panel, and I said the Tea Party would be a flash in the pan, and I know that because someone was tweeting it in the front row, and I saw it afterwards that they captured that little quote I said. So the Tea Party did not have a great year, right? Like, we keep talking about Chris McDaniel. He was like their big, big hope, right? They didn't oust Lamar in Tennessee. They didn't oust Pat Roberts, right? Going forward, I mean, on the one hand, the Tea Party, I think, in many ways is just now part of the Washington establishment. It's kind of been, parts of it have been incorporated. On the other hand, it's really hard to see them collecting a whole lot of steam. And I think in many ways, you're talking about the greater Republican electorate mindset movement, what Rand Paul is doing with libertarians and youth voters is having a much greater impact, and I think will have a much greater impact in 2016 than the Tea Party, which is to say I think it was right.
I think this is a good way to handle it, and we'll get through a lot of these questions if we have one of us answer. So you go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm Casey Redmond Weinberg. My question is, we've seen a lot of, between the defeats and the retirements, we're going to see a lot of turnover on the foreign policy committees this next coming Congress. What do you think are going to be the changes we see in foreign policy coming out of Congress?
I can answer that because I used to cover a lot of the armed services. Well, I can talk about armed services. McCain's definitely going to be chairman of the Armed Services Committee. That is going to be interesting. McCain has proposed a lot of military action in a lot of countries that we haven't, where we haven't done it, and he's a big hawk. I don't know, though, if other he's going to bring other Republicans along with him at this point. Wars are very expensive. He also may go after some big defense budget items. So that'll be interesting to watch. Again, I don't know how much that's going to affect, really going to affect our military spending and what we do overseas. Does somebody else want to answer about foreign relations?
That'll
Menendez has been the chair of foreign relations, Democrat, but not necessarily a friend of the White House. So the change over there for the White House foreign policy might not be so great. But it is interesting on some foreign policy issues. Trade is something we've heard about a lot. In particular, it's actually probably better for the president's agenda than it was when Democrats were running the show.
Sir, please.
Stan Kroc, Medill Graduate School.
There you go.
How are you, Liz? More people have been married to Kim Kardashian than have died from treating Ebola patients in the United States. Fewer still have been killed by ISIS in the United States. My question is, had more context been given, this is sort of an old-fashioned journalism question, to some of these very legitimate news stories, and had the White House done a better communications job on all the economic stats that you're talking about, would the outcome have been different?
I'll just answer that. I was on a panel earlier this week with Helene Cooper, a fantastic reporter at the Times who's from Liberia, and she covers the Pentagon now, but she went to Liberia to cover the Ebola outbreak and to cover the Pentagon's response to it. She was embedded with the military. And I was so struck by her anger about how coming back here and seeing this hysteria when she had been in Liberia. I mean, she quarantined herself for 21 days out of just supreme caution. She had just got out on Monday, actually. But she was so struck by the hysteria here and made this point that how many people have died of Ebola in the United States? Exactly one, and he was Liberian, and it was caught too late. So somebody else can answer the other part of the question, which is would things have been different?
No.
Okay.
I don't think it would have had an impact. There's nothing, I mean, yes, do I think that it may have, if the president had been seen as handling these crises in a more effective manner, I still don't see that Democrats would have run to his side. I don't know that it would have affected his approval rating all that much. It didn't move dramatically throughout these crises. It was more a narrative issue for him. But the single biggest correlation that you can find in midterm elections is the president's approval rating to his party's results. And that, I just don't think, I just don't see how, if the more context was given, which I think is a fair critique, and if he had been more effective, I don't think the sour mood of the country and his standing was going to somehow dramatically change.
Selfishly, for me, it's a personal point of frustration. I think that we fail people in situations like that. I did a piece on the hysteria and broke down some of the facts and was even speaking to psychologists in this area, including one near Dulles Airport, and he was talking about just the rush of young people that were coming to see him, and we're talking about their fears from Ebola because of their proximity to Dulles, which is the airport through which the Thomas Eric Duncan, the Liberian man, flew en route to Dallas. And and we were criticized as a news organization because we spent several minutes doing a story on the Ebola fears and then my story on the hysteria. And, so I'm not sure how much we actually helped the process in that.
Can I just break into, then I'll stop, I know one person per question, but what you asked about Obama and should they have done a better job, broadcasting the economic improvements. They, Julie knows this, they are, and you know this, but they are, he's been reserved about it because, if you go out and you pump up how great the economy is doing and how low the unemployment rate is, there's still huge numbers of people out there who don't have jobs, and so they don't want to do all this happy talk and be completely dissonant with the large majority.
Ironically, minimum wage did very well in the states that had it on the ballot, which was the message they were hoping we'd be talking about today. Sir, please.
Howard Marks, Medill Graduate School. So I have a question either for Shira or for David. The lame duck session begins next Wednesday, and the continuing resolution expires on December 11th. Do either of you foresee the CR being extended beyond the lame duck or the passage of a 2015 regular omnibus appropriations bill? How do you see that lame duck playing out? Thank you.
I defer to Shira and Kelly.
Such a roll call question. Everyone cringes at talk of the CR. Yeah.
I did not expect a question about the CR tonight. So I think, is kind of David alluded to earlier, if we were going to have like this great moment of kumbaya where everyone like fakes getting along for 2 weeks, right? The CR would be a great opportunity. You know, you could really get it done. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think they'll probably just continue.
Shira, will you explain what the CR is, maybe for folks in the room?
Oh, right. It stands for continuing resolution, and in this case, it is basically, it's not a budget, but it's continuing funding to keep the government running, basically.
In lieu of a new budget.
You could add, you could change priorities, give different amounts. It is continuing exactly what was from the previous term, and that presents problems at times. But what I think won't happen is there won't be a to the brink, shut down the government moment. That's not going to happen. And so if expedience dictates that a CR, to use the term of art, is necessary, then that's what they will do.
CR is sort of like a Band-Aid, and we sell them in bulk in Washington. They use one after another. Sir, please.
Hi, I'm Jeff Bowman, and I'm a Medill dad. My daughter Teresa graduated in 2008.
Nice.
My question is, if indeed the honeymoon is over after 2 days, 48 hours, what is the prospect of anything getting done over the next 2 years?
I was going to say, we were so gloomy in this at the start. I think there is a possibility for some things to happen. I mean, you saw yesterday between Mitch McConnell and the president, they talked about simplifying the tax code, international trade deals. What else? There was 3 things they were Keystone. Well, no, I don't know, but
the White House didn't talk about that.
a lot of economic issues, and I do think that both sides have an incentive now, because of this midterm, to get along. Republicans know, and you heard this from the leadership, that they can't, have another shutdown, that they have to prove that they can govern. They're heading into 2016. They've got to prove that they are, a mature party that will govern. And so they do have an incentive. And I think on immigration, I think we were talking about this in the office today, I think Obama will do something before January, some executive action that will potentially legalize, 2 to 3 million undocumented workers. We don't know how big he's going to go, and there'll be calls for impeachment. But I think there's also, can the Republicans really afford to scream and yell as they head into a presidential election where they need Hispanic votes? You tell me. Tell me yes or no.
Well, no, I would just say I think Mitch McConnell has that incentive, but I don't know if Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Marco Rubio, who are going to be courting a very conservative primary and caucus electorate in Iowa, New Hampshire, what have you, and who can stand on the Senate floor, and you're going to have these senators running for president. That is going to be, Mitch McConnell's going to start learning a little bit what it's like to be John Boehner and deal with those headaches inside the party. And
the calendar is not necessarily in the favor of compromise and deals. There's probably a pretty short window once the new Congress is in place before you do get people like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul who are actively not just talking and looking about running for president, but actively running for president. And Mitch McConnell can probably only hold them off for so long. Obama, similarly, cannot count on full support from Democrats forever. Democrats will also be moving on relatively quickly.
And sorry, I know, Peter, you want to get through all these questions. I just want to add one thing here. I think this is going to be what Julie just hit on. I think it's going to be one of the most interesting dynamics in the year ahead, and especially in the 8 months ahead. Because you see now a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate. We all think that, okay, Barack Obama may actually look at the clock, see he's got 2 years left, want to build some legacy items that haven't been built yet. Maybe there's an opportunity, the way Bill Clinton saw an opportunity, to work on something that could get him a real legacy item across the aisle. Maybe that was, but the moment he starts trying to compromise with the Republicans on this, Hillary Clinton, who is going to be wooing, even without a real primary challenge, she will have the ghost of a primary challenge. She's going to be wooing the left wing of her party, and you're going to start seeing how Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, the divide, real quickly, because she's going to have to start charting a different course than the president who wants to potentially reach across the aisle to Mitch McConnell and John Boehner.
I'll say one more thing. There will be accomplishments on climate change. Obama has proposed these 2 major deal regulations through the EPA that are going to curb carbon emissions. They're proposed. they will happen by the end of his term. And those were executive actions.
I was just going to say, not until Mitch McConnell shows up at his first remarks in the Senate when he has that sun leather glow, that orange glow, then we'll know he's really feeling the experience of John Boehner. Please, go ahead.
Nice. Hi, I'm Rachel Gandel, graduated from Weinberg in 2008. If we could go back to the more immediate future again and talk about the lame duck just really quickly. Yeah. I'm curious what you think we can expect over the next few weeks, especially out of the Senate. With Harry Reid on his way out as majority leader, will he want to show that they can get stuff done, like the Medicare doc fix, as someone who works in healthcare, or will he want to leave those tougher votes for the 2016ers up and make the Republicans deal with it next year?
Kelly O?
Well, the Medicare doc fix is the chit used in every negotiation. So unless there is a compelling negotiation, it will not be employed. What that is many years ago, the cost of living was not factored in for reimbursing doctors who provide services in Medicare. And so they are always at the precipice of some unbelievable drop in their fees. And if that were to happen, they would then not see Medicare patients. And you can imagine all the horribles that come from that. So instead of ever fixing it, they use it as a bargaining chip, and it's a very effective one whenever there is a big negotiation. Harry Reid will want to get some things done. Chief among them will be confirming a new attorney general. The president has to give us that name. We haven't heard it yet. And they will try to push through some of the nominees. Perhaps they'll do the National Defense Authorization Act, but not much else. And one of the things that Harry Reid has done in his masterful knowledge of the Senate rules, as he has very much limited, if not eliminated, the opportunity to have much in the way of amendments or changes. So kumbaya is not going to break out, but they will get some things accomplished that matter to the White House, and some things that they will need those Democratic votes who are still going to be there. And frankly, Mitch McConnell wants Harry Reid to get as many of those things off the list, so in the 114th Congress, they can begin with a Republican agenda that doesn't have a lot of leftovers. So I would expect that Republicans will work to get those things done too in order to clear the decks so they can start fresh.
One thing that you are going to see start, and perhaps not finish during the lame duck, but start, is a discussion about a new AUMF and authorization for use of military force for the campaign against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And I actually think this is going to be really fascinating because Congress has spent the last several years talking a lot about wanting a say in military action anytime the president wants to do something, but they don't really want to actually take votes on this. And what the president is basically saying is, well, now is your opportunity. So I think this is going to be a fascinating debate. Again, it will start probably in the lame duck. The votes probably won't actually happen until Republicans take over the Senate officially.
Little hat tip right now to social media and Twitter. Thank you for hashtag ANightWithNU for those of you watching streaming right now live on our camera in the back. Shira, this one's for you. We'll do this as sort of like a fast round, our speed round, okay? Lightning round, thank you. What if freshmen in the House had to be roommates with a member of the opposite party? Would civility be restored?
Or get worse.
You know, I once talked to Al Franken, the senator from Minnesota, who had this idea that...
That'd be a good roommate, though.
Yeah, he'd be, I think it'd be a fun place, fun house. So he had this idea that senators should bunk together, right? Like the U.S. taxpayers should pay for essentially dorms for senators so they'd all like get to know each other, right? And so this is an idea if you talk to a lot of people who...
Allison Hall, now on Capitol Hill.
I was Allison Hall, 4th floor.
Me too, 2nd floor.
Are you 4th floor? If they, I mean, I think it'd be interesting, but you also have to remember the lifestyle of being a member of Congress doesn't always lend itself to things like, you know, roommates. Sometimes members will bring their families to Washington, D.C., and they get a lot of heat for it back home. But it's a decision they make because it's one of the only ways they feel like they can see their family and be a part of their children's lives, right? So it's often much more difficult than it sounds.
Let's go lightning round. So we're going to make these quick. It's a challenge for people who are in the business of talking. What if members of Congress, David, for you, what if members of Congress had to be in session 5 days a week, 9 to 5? Would more get done? They're not in session very often, as for folks who come to Washington quickly learn.
I don't know. They haven't proven to me yet that, like, when they're here, a lot gets done. So I'm not convinced that being here more will get more done.
Kelly, in the age of the tweet, how do you overcome these short negative sound bites, economy, Ebola, etc.?
It's challenging. I find when I tweet things, sometimes I'll see people tweet back the 50 things I couldn't have mentioned in my 140 characters as if it was some great, error of journalism. Tweets are not journalism. They're a way to pop out some things. And so I think it's a challenge. I try to be very mindful in my tweeting, to tweet about both parties even-handedly. I try to tweet things that I think are of interest, that might give people a window into what's happening, but they are not a substitute, they're addition to what we do.
Tweets are good sports journalism, though. Thank you for the NU football Twitter handle, because that's how I find out what's going on in games when I'm driving. You literally get like every play, and we have now run through the middle for 7 yards.
Last weekend.
Yeah, no, that's true. I was babysitting my daughter, so we had the TV off. Sir, your turn.
And presidential candidates typically say a campaign run is the most physically challenging thing you can imagine. Yeah. NFL football coaches will do 100-hour weeks for 20 hours straight and maintain their interest, but they're all trying to win something. How do you guys, as much as you like the news, keep up your level of interest doing 100-hour weeks on and on and on and on yourselves? For, if a couple of you could respond.
In 5 years, we all get into crisis communications.
That one thing, particularly if you're following a specific candidate, is to find opportunities to do stories that are separate from the candidate. Either go to a battleground state and spend a couple days just talking to voters, do an enterprise story where you either dig into a specific policy, or you go profile somebody interesting who's around the candidate. But get off the plane, get off the bus, stop listening to the stump speech. And a couple days, talking to real people, it really can energize you and motivate you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're going to do, I think, about 5 more minutes because we only have so much time to be here. So we'll try to make these fast, and then we want to be able to say hi to some folks as well up in the front. So, sir, go ahead.
Charlie Banks, parent of a recent graduate. In 2008, Obama won a whole bunch of states by less than 4.2%, I think 5. I'm sure there were a lot of things that contributed to it. One of them had to have been messaging. Since the day he was elected, the messaging, I think I could have done a better job. 2-part question. I'm not a professional, by the way. Two-part question. 1, how do you reconcile that difference? And 2, if it's that he should have had his people who ran his campaign in the White House, why didn't he?
He did. Yeah, I would say that actually after the 2008 campaign, a lot of people from the campaign staff moved into the White House, and I think the simplest way to answer this is that it is a very different message when you are selling a candidate than when you are selling a governing strategy and policies, and they proved very effective at selling the candidate, the brand of Barack Obama, what it represented for this country, and they proved far less effective at selling policies. And he has tried numerous different ways and numerous different combinations of people in the White House to try to rectify that. I think what you saw in this election is that 6 years in, they still haven't been able to do it. Now, do I have the best economic message that I could say that he should give? No, it's tough. As Elisabeth said, you're looking at an economy that's split between stock markets that are doing really well and corporate profits that are doing really well, and Americans whose wages haven't gone up. It is a tough message to sell, but you very, very clearly saw that the good news that he thinks he has just has not gotten through to the American people.
And the challenge to us who do this for a living is economic stories visually are a lot more challenging to tell than ISIS and Ebola and those things that visually become more compelling and ultimately drive the news cycles for times that, as we witnessed, I think, last longer than necessarily they are entitled to. Sir.
Hi, I'm Philip Swartz from Medill. A lot of the issues that voters are concerned about that we've discussed here tonight, Ferguson, the Secret Service, Ebola, ISIS, they've all sort of occurred or come to a peak in the past 6 months. Was there something particular about this midterm election that sort of brought everything to a head recently, or is this more typical of midterm elections that they're more focused on sort of the past 6 months?
In general was a later breaking campaign. At least it felt like that for us in the newsroom, right? Usually the start of campaigns is after Labor Day, right? That's when the ads really start going on the air. This time it felt like the first week of October. I think people generally are sick about politics, and that's when you really started to see undecided voters shift in a lot of the Senate races was the first or second week of October.
Sir, please.
My name's Lee Wack. I went to Medill. My question, and I think for David or Kelly, what could the Democrats have done differently when it comes to being more on offense in this campaign than they seem to be on defense? It didn't seem that the defensive stance worked for them, and obviously there was a lot of trepidation as far as tying oneself with the president. But what achievements could have been lauded? What could have been focused on as far as things to do and things that they could have focused on aggressively that might have changed the outcome?
Well, part of it is difficult because some of the Democrats we've talked about who lost were swept into office sharing the ballot with Barack Obama on a very big night. So they may have benefited on the front end and ridden it with him to this point where it was really too hard to overcome the conditions. They certainly, day in, day out, talked about an economic message. They talked about concerns about women's issues. In Colorado, Mark Udall spoke about things that you would think women voters would be interested in to such an extent that he probably turned off some male voters who ran to Cory Gardner. The
Fox
Republican.
News mocked him as Mark Uterus
Yes.
for much of the campaign.
Yes. Very good. I didn't want to say that word, so I was hoping Peter would fill it in. So some of it was just the state of the map, the states that come up in a given cycle. A third of the Senate is up each time. And some of it was the fact that any time you have, Elizabeth and I covered George Bush when it was his bad midterm, and no one wanted to be on the stage with George Bush, and no one wanted him to appear for him. There are some Democrats who feel the president should have been utilized more, and he was utilized basically only in some gubernatorial elections.
And lost a lot of them.
And I think there is a set of facts that was going to be very hard for Democrats to overcome, to the extent that many Democrats even stayed home and many Democrats were not engaged, and many in the Latino community did not turn out. And so sometimes the state of play is just such that there isn't one thing they could have done differently and have a different outcome.
Sir, please.
So Mondo, I'm a former political journalist. I was just kind of looking at a pattern going back to the Eisenhower administration. Would you say that voters tend to tire of the party in power? Well, I mean, sure. 58, Eisenhower lost. Yes. Reagan lost the Senate in '86. And Bush lost to both houses of Congress in 2006. Of course, Clinton dodged it because of Monica in '98, but impeachment. So I just kind of curious.
People do tire of the party in power. The president's in all of our living rooms all the time, and his party is in our world. And even the most skillful politicians struggle with that. And then when these other issues we've talked about with, confidence in government, the economy, concerns about foreign threats, all of that just creates a very difficult environment. And I think you also got a sense from the president that he was not feeling like this was going to be a good midterm year. And he receded in part because Democrats told him to, asked him to, insisted that he do that. But you also got the sense that he was not feeling like he could win it back if he could only get out there and try to rebottle 2008. It just was one of those years. And as you look back, people tire of the person that they are, that's in their living room.
We're going to lightning round these final ones, please.
Michael Dean, McCormick, 14. Peter, I apologize. This is a question for everybody, but I just want 2 names from everybody, and so I owe the panelists an apology because I'm not going to tweet this. This is not an I gotcha moment. It won't be in the future. I just want 2 names.
You're not going to tweet it, but
yeah, right. Everyone, please hold up your phone. Prove that you're not going to. Okay. Presidential nominees 2016. If you had to guess tonight, just for fun.
Oh gosh. I'm not allowed to predict, so
Yes.
I got a policy on that. That we have a policy at the time, so
That's
I'm not
fair.
We got to get that policy. We got to get that policy.
But you guys can do it.
Peter, you're welcome to answer too.
I'm going to use some message discipline and not answer.
But you guys can have fun.
Oh, thanks. I don't know. It's an impossible thing.
How about this? Can Jeb Bush and Chris Christie get through the primary system to be viable candidates?
Sure, I think they probably can.
I don't think so.
I mean, I think they have as good a shot getting through the nomination process as any other Republican candidate that's being mentioned.
Shira?
I think it's very difficult, right? You'd have to have a field where basically everyone else runs to the right, so they come out on top in these Republican primaries. And the politics of Chris Christie's personality, do not underestimate them. They love him in New Jersey for a lot of it. A lot of people hate him in New Jersey, but he was reelected. But in Iowa, his personality will not play as well at all.
Scott Walker. We'll be talking about Scott Walker. Go ahead.
Ray Ellis, McCormick, 68. I'm awesomely impressed by the panel and the distinguished panel that we have today. I was just struck, and I wanted to ask, I'm not sure if Mr. Alexandra can answer, but are there any graduates from Medill at either the Wall Street Journal or the Fox Network? And
James
I'm
Rosen.
not sure who can answer this question.
James is good.
James Rosen has been on this. I was here with him in 2004 here. Yeah. That was a very noisy event.
The story about James Rosen.
Brody Mullins, right, at the Wall Street Journal?
Yeah, Brody Mullins. When we were here last time, for those of you who were with us, James Rosen, we were asked to make opening remarks like today. That's why I did the 20-second rule this time, because we all said, well, I'm Peter. I enjoy walks and conversation. And James rolled out like a script. And basically, he had handed out embargoed remarks. We were in trouble at that moment. Go ahead.
Ralph Vonderhagen from Kellogg. I think we'd all agree we have a large middle class whose incomes have been static for considerable periods of time. As the election approached, large numbers of them were receiving indications that their health care costs were going up due to various aspects of Obamacare, and that clearly was a turnoff. Do you think this Congress, the new Congress, will deal with that and look to lowering health care costs for those folks?
Well, that's an aspiration. I mean, when you hear right now, I was with John Boehner today and Mitch McConnell in Kentucky yesterday, and they both talked about the health care law. They're in the victory lap right now, so part of what they are saying is intended for all of those Republican donors, activists, and voters who want to hear repeal of the health care law. Then there will be a more practical side. Since they will have the keys to the car, expect the House to pass a full repeal, as they have done a number of times. Now it will go to the Senate, and then what will they look for there? What I expect, based on what both McConnell and Boehner are saying and various aides, they will try to pick apart aspects of the law that have been criticized in a bipartisan way, in some ways, something like the medical device tax, which was used to generate revenue to pay for the law, but also drove businesses out of the country. They'll look for ways to try to make it less difficult for the employee, the 40-hour week rule. So what you'll see is sort of a dismantling of the law, if they can get it through, because they'll still need a handful of Democrats, and there will be a few surviving moderate Democrats who might go along with that. But the intention is to do some retooling. For as long as the president's in office, there's no way for that to be repealed because he would not sign it. But taking it apart and changing it is something that even Democrats would say, there are tweaks, there are adjustments that could be made that would not bring it down. And the other part of it is big social policy tends to stay in law over time, but you can make changes to it. So I think that's one of the things, and people feel it in their pocketbook. So if their premiums are going to be more expensive, they'll try to address that. But healthcare costs are expensive for everyone.
Before they boot us from the room, and we want to have a moment to say hi to some folks, just the last one. We'll really try to do this quickly, but with the risk of taunting New York Times policies on this, I want projections. The next time we're here, 2 years from now, to do this again, hopefully post-2016, this doesn't have to be candidate-specific. The Tea Party, you said, might be a flash in the pan, Shira, the last time you sat here. What are some of the things you anticipate will be the themes of the next couple years?
I think that we will probably be talking about a Senate landscape that looked much more favorable for Democrats than this last Senate landscape.
For sure. David, thoughts?
We will definitely have a conversation about Bill Clinton's impact on the 2016 campaign.
And 2020 and 2024?
Iran will be part of the conversation.
The president writing a letter to Ayatollah Khomeini, we learned today.
it will be part of the conversation in some way, either
That
in a
counts.
positive or very negative way.
Kelly?
I think it'll be, are we talking about elections as a path to the future with new faces and new candidates, or will we be still looking at some of the tried and true names of American politics? Will it be Bush? Will it be Clinton? Or will there be a generational break and people wanting to move forward with names that are not as predictable?
Shira?
Yeah, I think something we'll be talking about, maybe not in 2 years, but for the next 2 years, is the McConnell-Boehner relationship. Let's not forget that the Senate Republicans still, despite Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, are more moderate than the House Republicans. So the House is probably going to send over a lot of stuff to the Senate that they aren't going to want to take a vote on. So I think that's going to be kind of a new relationship to watch over the next 2 years, and it'll say a lot about the direction of the Republican Party in 2016.
I think those are pretty good. I want to thank you guys very much. Am I going to answer that question? I will answer that. My projection over the next 2 years is Malia Obama becomes a cherub at Northwestern University. We will work on that and bring them back home to Chicago. Thank you guys very much. It has been our privilege to be a part of this event this evening. Please, go ahead.
Good evening. Just 1 minute.
One more minute.
That's right. 1 more minute. I'm Sarah Busher, and I'm president of the NU Club of DC. Just want to thank all of our panelists tonight.
One more minute, please, respectfully.
Want to thank all of our panelists tonight for their great insights. So can we give them another hand? Thank you. This event tonight is one of the many Northwestern alumni events held in the DC area every year. I encourage you to learn more about how to get involved with the club by reading the flyer on your chair. And this concludes tonight's event. Thanks for coming and have a wonderful evening.